You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is brought to you by the publishers of Renew Economy, Australia's best informed, most read website focusing on the green energy transition, and is supported by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Hello and welcome to Switched On Australia. I'm Anne Delaney. Australia is a global solar superpower. We have the highest uptake of rooftop solar in the world, with around a third of standalone homes now generating their own electricity. But if you live in an apartment, chances are you've been locked out of that revolution. Just 3.5% of Australian apartments have solar. Today on Switched On Australia, we're looking at a new idea that could start to change that: balcony solar. These are small plug-in solar systems designed for balconies, patios and other small spaces, which make solar possible even without a roof of your own. In parts of Europe where apartment living is the norm, balcony solar is already taking off. And in California, lawmakers have just cleared the way for it to scale by reclassifying plug-in solar as a household appliance and stripping away the red tape that's long held it back. So, how close is Australia to seeing solar panels hanging from apartment balconies? And what's standing in the way? Brent Clark is the CEO of Wattblock, an energy consultancy that works exclusively with apartment buildings. He's been advising councils, governments and owners' corporations on how to electrify multi-unit housing. And he says balcony solar could be one of the most important missing pieces in Australia's clean energy transition. Brent Clark, thanks so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thanks, Anne. Great to be here.
Now, Brent, give me an idea of what balcony solar is and what it can actually power.
Okay, well, in Australia, we're very familiar with rooftop solar. Balcony solar is something that really took off in Germany. And if you can imagine getting a very, very small solar system, just a couple of panels, and actually hooking them over a balcony that could be on an apartment building or a balcony if you're a renter renting a house, you could actually just hook these solar panels with a little kit yourself, hang them off the balcony. Sometimes you can get a balcony and battery solar kit. And the key innovation that when people talk about balcony solar, they're sort of referring to this first European model, or let's call it the German model, where you don't need a solar installer to connect it into your home. The key innovation is, in Australia, we've got these three-prong general power outlets, and everyone's used to plugging them, appliances into them for electricity to flow into the appliance, whether it's your toaster or fridge or whatever. The key innovation with balcony solar is that you have a solar system, and on the backside of that solar system, you've got a three-prong general power outlet plug. And without a solar installer, you plug that into one of your existing power outlets in your home. And the solar that's generated on the balcony is flowing into the power point and then into the circuits in your home, and you're not drawing from the grid. So
Plug and play.
Plug and play. It's, I imagine in Australia, you could have in the future a Bunnings weekend warrior or an IKEA shopper that drives out on Sunday morning, gets this kit, puts it in the back of the car, takes it home, sets it up in about 15 to 20 minutes, and has the benefit of solar power on the same day.
But we can't do that yet, can we? I mean, as you said, it is an innovation that they're using in Germany. And I understand that California probably is the most recent American state where they've reclassified these balcony solar systems as appliances and not utilities. So that's the first step towards being able to use these systems.
Yeah, that's right. We'll go back and we'll hold out Germany as the kind of the gold standard, then we'll move across to the US. I'll try and do my best pronunciation here, but in Germany they call it Balkonkraftwerk, which just means balcony solar plant, and it took off at such a rate that they've got over 1 million of these solar panel systems hanging off the balconies in Germany.
And when did they start installing them?
It's only a couple of years ago.
Right.
Yeah, like last 2 or 3 years. And then it spread to the other European countries. There are a couple of holdouts like Hungary and Denmark, wasn't comfortable with the safety issue around the plug-in yourself model and that, but most of the other European nations said it's an acceptable risk. And so it's taken off like wildfire in Europe, particularly amongst renter populations. And in Europe, they've got a lot more renters than we do in Australia. The majority in some of these European countries are renting. In Australia, it might be only 31% are renters. But when you move from one rental property to another, or a house or a unit to a unit, you just unplug your balcony solar and take it with you. And so, following the success of balcony solar in Europe, then one US state, which was Utah, was the first to allow this model. And now we see California's moving forward with it. They're in the process of allowing it. And obviously, if something happens in California, it's a huge influence on the rest of the Western world. So if we just go back and have a look at some of the things that made it so popular in Germany, first of all, they allowed it for people that didn't even have a smart meter installed.
How has that helped?
So the smart meters are the digital meters that can record electricity moving both ways through the meter, like coming from the grid in and also measure solar feeding going back out.
And so it gives your retailer an idea of, a very good idea of how much power you're using so they can charge you generally.
Yes. And like in Australia, maybe you're paying 35 cents for the electricity coming in from the grid, and maybe you get, if you're lucky, 5 cents paid to you for what you send back into the grid from a normal rooftop solar system.
If you're not being charged to actually put it back into the system.
Well, yes. In Germany, if you were a renter and the apartment you're renting still had an analog electricity meter, so think of an electricity meter that has a spinning disc that just spins around, and it's got the accumulation number increasing on every rotation of the spinning disc.
I remember them.
Yep. Well, we've got a ton of them in New South Wales. Victoria did a big project to switch the whole state over to smart meters, but in New South Wales, we've still got a lot of these older spinning disc electricity meters that won't get upgraded till 2030. But in Germany, if you plug in a balcony solar system and you've got your couple of solar panels hanging over the balcony, and if they're 0.8 kilowatts to 1.2 kilowatts, which for a long time our rooftop solar was 6.6 kilowatts in Australia. It's a bit bigger now, but you can see they're quite small size systems that were going in Germany. If you plug this in and it created a little bit more power than your unit needed at the time, and you had an analog meter, then the spinning disc would actually rotate backwards for the period of time that you were feeding into the grid, which means in Germany you would actually be making the same amount of money by selling the excess solar to the grid as you pay for importing it from the grid.
Wouldn't that be satisfying, watching the meter go backwards?
Just go backwards. We're just turning, it's like a time travel machine. Like we're just turning back the clock,
Yeah.
right? Electrically. So obviously that was popular. And if you kept it under this small size of, originally 0.8 to 1.2 kilowatts, you didn't have to go through any regulatory process to do a grid application connection. Anyone that's done rooftop solar in Australia would have known that they've got to have their solar installer submit a whole lot of documents to the grid provider to inform them that there's a solar system there.
And it has to be hardwired into your electrical system. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's Australian standard, New Zealand standard 4777 for grid connection. So that's one of the standards for connecting a solar system to the grid that you have to meet in Australia. And then also in Australia, there's another Australian New Zealand standard 3000 called the wiring rules. And in 2023, we actually banned what are called type AC residual current devices, which are the breakers that are in your meter panel behind your apartment. We actually banned using those old type AC residual current devices. And since 2023, we've got to install at least type A, which, if we just explain why that's important in Australia, but keeping in mind we've got all these old breakers, and in fact, if you go into old apartment buildings in New South Wales, you've got even older technology. You've still got ceramic fuses, which is dinosaur era. If you think about it, these circuit breakers that you have in a meter box, the ones that we've got predominantly in Australia, they only trip if electricity is running in the direction that there's a fault, and electricity is running in the direction that they expect it to be running in.
Right.
And now
that is coming from the grid to our homes.
To the appliance. If there's a fault with, say, your balcony solar system, which is generating solar power, and it's sending current down the wire in the opposite direction through this circuit breaker, and you get a fault with your balcony solar system, it's not going to trip the breaker. So that's one of the challenges. Is since 2023, we've got this rule that all our circuit breakers have to be able to detect not only alternating current coming from the grid, but perhaps a DC fluctuating current leakage coming from a balcony solar system that's heading back to the grid. If the fault's coming that way, you need the circuit breakers to trip whichever direction the electricity is running. So
that's going to take a while for that to kind of permeate, Australian apartments and homes, etc., in order to be able to put up the balcony solar.
Yeah, that's right. I would expect that in Australia, no one's meant to have a solar system connected to analog rotating spinning disk electricity meters. You're meant to have a smart meter. And look, sometimes when solar gets installed and you've got the old meter, it runs for a little period of time while you're waiting for your grid provider to upgrade to a smart meter. But you can't run solar in Australia without having a smart meter.
And those smart meters aren't going to run backwards, are they?
The new smart meters will yeah. Oh yeah, they're not going to run backwards and give you the benefits. They're gonna reduce the benefits you get for sending electricity out. But so there are a couple of our regulatory hurdles. But then in Australia, you need to have an SAA, a Solar Accreditation Australia solar installer, install your solar system.
Other than having enough, qualified installers to do that's not such an impediment, is it?
No. We've got over 7,000 solar installers who'd be happy to do balcony solar. And if you were to do a hardwired balcony solar that really mimics the way it connects to the grid the same, doesn't mimic, connects to the grid the same way as a rooftop solar system, you could legally do a balcony solar system today. But you're not capturing this innovation of the plug-in
simplicity and the ease.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can't just,
Yeah.
wake up on a Saturday morning and go, let's go to Bunnings and get our balcony solar.
Yeah, you're waiting 4 weeks for a grid connection application and paperwork and documents and all this to do solar at the moment. And so, part of this balcony solar revolution is you wake up and I want solar today. I go and I buy my kit and I plug it in and then I've got solar that day. Also, in Australia, if we just look at some of the other regulatory challenges, like we've had this issue with e-bike battery fires, and people jump on Temu and order it from China, and it comes into the country and it doesn't have a registered compliance mark that it's been tested as an electrical product in Australia. Then we've had a lot of these incidences where these really cheap e-bike, e-scooter batteries catching on fire,
and they're also can be incompatible with the bike model. For instance, that incompatibility between the battery and the actual appliance is a problem.
Yeah, and so in Australia, if you're going to plug in electrical equipment, it should have a registered compliance mark that has been tested here and it's safe to use in Australia. And then also, we've got Australian Standard 5033's installation and safety requirements for PV arrays. We've got the Clean Energy Council with, a set of items you've got to tick off. Sometimes we've got state-based installation rules. And then we've got the Building Code of Australia and the National Construction Code. And in Australia, if we want to hang something off a balcony, like in strata buildings, we've got these regulations where people have to replace balconies sometimes to get them to the right height because they weren't built at the right height. And the concern would be that is the balcony railing, is the integrity of it good enough that it will hold the weight of the hanging solar panels when you've got wind loading and the highest wind coming through. So when you do a rooftop solar system, it's compulsory to get a wind speed assessment, which takes into account the biggest wind gusts in your local area to make sure the solar panels won't fly off the roof. That's something that's in our rooftop solar regulatory environment, but how do we sort of manage that in balcony solar? In Germany, they're giving the owner the freedom to determine whether their balcony has enough structural integrity.
Is that working? Handing it back to the consumers to do those assessments?
It is, and even to the point that you wouldn't believe it in Germany. Landlords started complaining about their tenants hanging the balcony solar, and now you actually have renter protections for the renters that the landlords can't tell them to uninstall the balcony solar system.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's the point that they've gotten to in Germany, which will hold up as our it's our number one leading light in the balcony solar universe.
So we're a long way from that, from what you're telling me, particularly in terms of all the different regulations that we have. What do you think needs to be done to get them in Australia? Or should we go, look, there are other solar options?
I think that I think we'll need a little bit more regulation in Australia than perhaps they've got in Germany. And what I think is, for these small systems in Germany, there's no process to tell the grid provider that you're actually installing this plug-and-play solar system. I think something in the middle in Australia might work where, sure enough, you've got to get a smart meter before you do balcony solar. You've got to get your Type A residual current devices or RCDs, those circuit breakers, into the meter board before you do it. I think maybe if the government...
And regulating the appliances properly, which we have not done with the EV bikes, I don't think.
Yeah, that's it. You've got to buy an approved product with a check mark on it that's been through electrical safety standards in Australia. And then I think maybe if the owner of the balcony solar plant, if they had a government app where they could register it themselves in 5 to 10 minutes with the grid provider, then at least the grid provider knows that it's there. And then when we move to the fourth tier of government, which we haven't spoken about, so we've got federal, state, local, and then strata. If you think about it, all the strata buildings that are reporting on fire to their local council each year, which is the bulk of them, they have a fire compliance company that comes in and goes inside every apartment every year and checks the smoke alarms are working, checks that the door closer on the fire door is closing. If you had a balcony solar or a balcony solar and battery, wouldn't you just have that fire compliance person that's coming in to check the smoke alarm and the door closer just go and check, visibly inspect for a minute or two the balcony solar and give it a tick? Then we would, make it through the fourth tier of government, which is strata.
You talk about there's no process to tell the grid operator about how much energy is going into the grid, for instance, into the system.
Or mainly that there is a system there that could
to make it
potentially
transparent.
be
Yes.
Yeah, to make it transparent.
Yes, because grid operators and regulators, they want more transparency on what households and all this distributed energy is doing now. Do you think there's going to be pushback from them to move towards balcony solar because of this transparency issue?
Yeah, look, and it's because, if we look at South Australia, it's the world leader in renewable energy, and Australia's battling with all this extra solar going into the grid, and later this year we might start to see the 3 hours free offers coming to people that have smart meters. Effectively, we're already dealing with more solar in the grid than the grid operators and the transmission networks can deal with at the moment. So for them, visibility and the more granular visibility that you've got helps them with planning for the future infrastructure, which, if we take ourselves up a step, I can see it's perfectly reasonable for grid operators to want to know where all the solar and all the batteries that can connect and send power into the grid are at any point in time. Because the more dense that you've got solar and batteries in a particular community, that helps you plan the future poles and wires for that community. So it's fair enough for it to be registered, but unlike these European models where you don't have to tell anyone about it, you just do it. Eventually, that's to everyone's benefit that's the most resilient, renewable powered grid that we can imagine, is where we know where it's all coming from and we know who's got what in each battery, when we've got brownouts and periods of high demand. And then the intelligent grid of the future is going to be wanting to send instructions to that, like virtual power plants and things like that, and demand management to be able to coordinate it. So we expect that in Australia we'll have more regulation around it than we would in Europe or Utah or California. But one interesting thing in the state of New South Wales, since 1st of July 2025, they updated the strata law in New South Wales to say that strata buildings can't have bylaws that stop you doing sustainability projects based on aesthetic reasons. And
so if you didn't like the look of balcony solar, for instance, you can't stop your neighbours
you can't
from
stop it.
installing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And that's already live since 1st of July 2025.
Do you know what's happening in the other states?
I think that they'll follow. Like, New South Wales, the ACT, Western Australia lowered the voting threshold for doing anything that's sustainable in apartment buildings. So they lowered it from, a typical 75% threshold down to a 50%. So if you got half the unit entitlements voting for something, it's easier than getting 3/4.
So that would include things like balcony solar, having a bylaw that would enable. I mean, obviously we've got to deal with the other regulations, but in terms of the strata, having a bylaw that would enable balcony solar, that would also involve putting in EV chargers into garages, I would guess. Communal solar.
Yes. Yeah. So all these things, in fact, it's in New South Wales, it's really broad. It's like anything that reduces pollution, waste, facilitates sustainable transport, such as electric vehicle charging, improves recycling, reduces carbon emissions. Basically, it's a catch-all. Any of those things.
What about just generally electrification as opposed to, apartment blocks still putting in gas?
This strata law applies after the building's constructed. You've already seen Victoria banning gas in new constructions, and that following City of Sydney, then following suit in its local council area. Yeah, anything that is degasification and electrification falls under this existing sustainability infrastructure amendment in New South Wales to the Strata Schemes Management Act, and more specifically around EV charge points. You can't have a bylaw that bans anything sustainable based on aesthetics, right? And so the example I use is, it's possible to buy an EV charge point that looks like Iron Man and has like the hose coming out of Iron Man's chest,
right?
To plug into your vehicle. And
I thought you were going to say crotch.
No, Iron Man, he's got the white dot in his chest. So the neighbour can't get that EV charge point banned on aesthetic reasons, because if that person wants Iron Man charge point, they get Iron Man charge point. And the same goes for fly screens, hanging air conditioners off the side of the building, hanging your washing on the balcony, putting balcony solar hanging off the balcony. All these things can't be banned in New South Wales unless you're in a heritage building or in a heritage conservation zone. So that's sort of opened that up. And
Brent, you founded Wattblock some years ago, 11 years ago, to help apartment dwellers navigate the renewable energy transition. How are we going? There are incentives for apartment owners. I know, for instance, solar in New South Wales, ACT and Victoria. Not sure about some of the others.
Maybe Northern Territory has it.
Oh, right. Okay. Didn't know. I mean, how are things improving? Because as we've said, a third of Australians are renting. We do have, not as high as Europe, but we've still got a significant number of people living in apartments. And, we need to bring everyone with us on this energy transition. What's your take in beginning of 2026? How are we going?
Yeah. So, look, if we're at, say, 3.5% penetration, we're a long way behind the standalone of solar. We're on apartment buildings. We're a long way behind standalone houses that might be, 36 or 37% or something like that. So there's a lot of catching up to do. I mean, apartment buildings in terms of batteries are about 1/100th the penetration of batteries into standalone houses. It's so minimal take up of the
cheaper home battery scheme.
You have the cheaper,
That's because of the difficulty in where to place them, because they've obviously got to be placed outside on a non-sleeping, non-living wall, I understand.
Well, that's the optimal place to put them, but you can put them in non-habitable parts, like some people have them in the car park area, but it's the fire risk which has kind of stymied or slowed down the battery take-up in strata buildings. So a long way behind on that.
And that's very significant, that fear of fires, which, let's face it, has been driven more by the faulty EV bikes and scooter batteries, which, as we've already discussed, don't have the same regulations, don't have the same registration as car batteries or home batteries. I mean, they're much more tightly regulated.
Yeah. So I understand that today there is a Volvo recall of 2,000 EVs, because of a fire risk. But the vehicles, they've all gone through ANCAP safety testing. It's a completely different ballgame from the scooters, the e-bike batteries, and the trade tool batteries as well. Like, we got lithium-ion batteries in a lot of trade tools. So the fear from those cheap, unregulated batteries catching on fire that came in created fear in apartment buildings against the good EV batteries, which have been reliable, and we don't have examples of EVs catching on fire when they're in apartment building basement car parks and things like that. But the fear crossed to that, and then the fear crossed over to the stationary batteries at the building as well. So we've got quite a long way to go, but in my own apartment building, we thought we've got very big balconies, and we've actually passed a balcony solar bylaw, which will allow our owners to put a balcony solar or a balcony solar and battery in place once it can meet the regulations required in Australia. And that was voted through using that Sustainability Infrastructure Amendment to the New South Wales Strata Schemes Management Act, which had the lower voting threshold. But we added a few things to our bylaw for our apartment building. No one's installed, a balcony solar system yet, but our bylaw said that if we're going to do balcony solar, it has to be the flexible, lightweight solar panels, not the glass solar panels.
And that's for a safety reason in case they blow off?
Yeah, that was just us self-regulating, thinking, well...
Let's get ahead of this.
Yeah, let's get ahead of this. And if there's a panel that's a flexible solar panel, and we know that the federal government's contributing $150 million to the Hunter Valley Foundry to help with production of Sunman flexible lightweight panels that came out of UNSW. If there's going to be locally produced, lightweight, flexible solar panels that aren't made of glass, we thought that's a reasonable risk mitigant to put into our bylaw that, yes, you can do balcony solar, but don't do it with a glass panel, because if it does blow off, it's going to fall, up to 9 stories and shatter into 1,000 pieces. If it's a flexible, lightweight panel, it'll probably just probably stay in one piece as it hits the ground. So that's something that we thought we'll put that into our bylaw and try and reduce that risk. And that is also keeping the panel system a bit lighter, 8 kilos or something for each of those flexible panels. 2 of those gives you a kilowatt.
And would you say that you've been able to get that bylaw accepted because of the recent New South Wales changes to the regulations, which only require 50% threshold of people agreeing?
Yes. So that's the sort of thing that people in New South Wales and ACT, Western Australia, have been able to take a bit more advantage of, is pushing through a few of these bylaws that improve sustainability. If you've got more resistance in a state like Victoria, you're not going to clear the hurdle with the votes. So it'd be good if that actually became uniform across every state and made it a bit easier for other people to get these bylaws through.
So just a final question, Brent. How hopeful are you that we will see balcony solar roll out here in Australia? And how important do you think it is in terms of the
Hmm.
energy transition?
I'm really hopeful about it. I would say it's probably a bit optimistic to think that it's 2026, but I think really what happens is, if it becomes a success in California, then it helps build the momentum here in Australia. And I think, we had a quick look at it. The Australian Photovoltaic Institute at UNSW thinks that there's about a 3 gigawatt opportunity for rooftop solar on apartment buildings in Australia that's untapped at the current time. And if you say we've got over 3 million apartments in Australia, probably maybe 3/4 of them are candidates for balcony solar, perhaps there could be another 1.9 gigawatt opportunity for solar that is also untapped in Australia. And when you think of it in those terms, that's a huge opportunity
Yes.
that I think everyone should be excited about.
Brent Clark, thank you for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thanks, Anne. Had a great time.
And Brent Clark is the CEO of Wattblock, unpacking how balcony solar could open the solar revolution to millions of Australians who are currently locked out of the transition. And as countries like Germany and California move to clear the regulatory hurdles, it'll be interesting to see whether Australia is ready to do the same or risk leaving apartment dwellers behind. Switched On is recorded and produced on the lands of the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation. I'm Anne Delaney, and I'll see you next time.